Hi, Jessica. Nice to have you as we cover on the topic of strengthening connection to protect against depression. Really nice to meet you and get to cover this topic here. I'm going to go ahead and cover our introductions for our attendees. My name is Bonnie, and I will be helping Jessica to learn more about what she does in her community. I have a background in social work from the University of Texas Rio Grande Valley, and I also work here with Agents of Change, providing social media creation, all of that great stuff on the prep side, and doing some continuing education, social media, as well as providing training so that we can get all of this great information out to mental health professionals. I have different experience in counseling with migrant youth as well as with foster children. So I'm really interested in learning from Jessica today for you all, so that we can better serve our own clients. So we have Jessica here. She is an LICSW as a mental health expert. She is the founder and chief of Connection Officer of Project Connection. She has over 2 decades of experience in this mental health promotion and community building. So we're really excited to hear all about this, specifically around depression and how we can learn more about this to better serve our clients who can be suffering from this, as well as how this comes about, and your really great experience, how we can kind of connect these things for ourselves.
Well, thank you. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to our conversation.
Definitely looking forward to learning so much more here. So I'd like to see and learn more about how this topic is important, of course, around depression. And I've noticed that the loneliness is definitely a really major public health crisis. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. Yeah, I think loneliness is starting to get more recognition and publicity, which is good. I think maybe that's like one of the little silver linings of COVID that people were suddenly like, oh, isolation and loneliness, it really has a huge impact on mental health. Maybe we need to take this seriously. So in 2023, the Surgeon General at the time released a report, our epidemic of loneliness and social isolation. And so that brought some attention to it. But essentially, in that report, he stated that half of Americans are lonely. So it's really affecting a lot of people. I think maybe it doesn't seem like that much because people often don't talk about being lonely because there's a stigma associated with it. And so sometimes, like for people who are lonely, they might feel like they're the only ones and everybody else is connected. Or you look at social media, it looks like everybody else is connected, but it's really affecting a lot of people.
Yeah, definitely. And is that number across the board of the majority of ages, or like where would that start off as? Do we have that as well?
Yeah, so definitely I think it's something that affects all different people, all different ages, all different ethnicities, but there are definitely some patterns. So in terms of age demographics, younger people actually have higher rates of loneliness than older people. So even though a lot of times you kind of hear conversations when we're talking about loneliness, the concern is expressed more for elderly people who might be isolated and have less ability to stay engaged in their communities. And that is an issue, but like each younger generation actually has higher rates of loneliness than the one before it. And so for Gen Z in particular, this is a really big struggle. And then, lower people with lower socioeconomic status struggle more with loneliness. LGBT community has higher rates of loneliness. So I think um, it also kind of depends on people's setting, like there's a person of color working in a predominantly white institution or a student who's going to a predominantly white college, and they aren't necessarily feeling like they have community and representation, then they're going to have higher rates of loneliness as well.
Wow, that's very interesting. And I'm glad that we're discussing this because it's important for us to consider as mental health professionals what type of setting is our client in? And are they at risk of depression with these environmental factors, right?
Yes.
Especially with, as you mentioned, like COVID and social
Yeah.
media and how all of that definitely impacted us.
People working remotely, I think since COVID, there's more people who are working remotely. And so definitely lots of perks to that, lots of like flexibility around scheduling and so on, but it can increase isolation as well.
Yeah. And how about if someone is very socially active, can loneliness still be affected by them?
Definitely. So, it's really loneliness is really subjective. It's a personal experience, so it's about the quality and not quantity of interactions. And so, it's kind of the gap between what they want and, the social life and relationships they want and the social life and relationships that they have. And so somebody who's socially active or even somebody who has lots of friends might still feel lonely if those social activities and friendships aren't meeting their social needs. So, for example, I think lots of times when people are lonely, they um, really might try to get connected by engaging in a lot of activities, but sometimes those activities are kind of overwhelming. Like I'm thinking about myself as an introvert. If I sign up for a lot of things, but it's like big group things and there's not deeper interaction, it can be really hard to make relationships. So people could have a very busy social calendar, but not actually be having those deeper, more meaningful interactions. And people might have lots of friends, but again, if those friends are friends that you're just having fun with, that's important, but also important to have friends that you feel like you can be yourself with and share what's going on in your life with. So, yeah, so it really is hard to tell from the outside based on somebody's, social calendar or who they're hanging out with, whether they are truly connected or lonely. It's more the internal experience of, are my social needs getting met?
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. So it's definitely important for us to consider, although they have a really big social network, or maybe not so much, that's definitely not a way to kind of rule some of these things out. It's about that genuine connection that's there. Thank you
Yes.
for sharing that. And how about I see here as far as it being like chronic loneliness, how would we be able to define some of those differences there of maybe first falling into this and then it being something more serious to some things to roll out and notice?
Yeah, well, I mean, loneliness is not like it's not in the DSM. It's not like a formal diagnosis, so there's not a formal criteria of like after, 4 weeks it becomes chronic loneliness, but I think what's important to recognize is that loneliness is a very normal part of the human experience, that it's something that we're all going to go through at different times in our lives, and there's nothing wrong with that, that loneliness is a signal to ourselves like to seek out connection in the same way that thirst is like, okay, your biological needs aren't getting met here. If you're thirsty, you need to find some water. So when we're lonely, we need to find connection. So people might experience connection at different life transitions, like relocating to a new area or going to college, starting a new job, becoming a parent, retiring, that kind of thing. And so really it only becomes concerning if it is a longer term and if it is really affecting quality of life. I think that has become a lot more common because it can be really challenging to make friends as adults. And so, you might experience some like relocate to a new area and then really have an ongoing struggle of making connections that feel nurturing and sustaining. So I would say, yeah, the chronic piece is length of time, but also is it impacting your mood and quality of life.
Yeah. And I also see here that there's definitely an increase to then the maybe some of those diagnoses, right, with depression,
Yeah.
anxiety, and even some physical things as well, maybe. So I see like heart
Yeah.
disease. Would you be able to explain that a little bit more for us to understand?
Sure. So I think a lot of times friendship and relationships are sort of in people put them in the like nice to have category rather than the need to have, but really we're wired to be social animals, so connection really is a biological need. We were sort of I think compared to other animals a little bit more vulnerable. So, not able to protect ourselves necessarily on our own. And so evolutionarily, we've lived in tribes and communities and groups. And so when we're away from our tribe or our group, it can really cause a spike in anxiety because it feels unsafe. And so over the long term that can contribute to depression. So there's been just tons of research around links to depression, like having close relationships protects against depression, protects against suicidality, protects against anxiety, and then on the flip side, that loneliness increases all of those things. And then in terms of physical health, people may have seen this. It got a lot of news play that chronic loneliness is as dangerous to health as about a 15 cigarette a day smoking habit. So there was a big meta-analysis of a lot of studies, and chronic loneliness and social isolation increases risk factors for lots of diseases, heart disease, blood pressure, dementia, uh, lots of things. So it increases like all cause mortality. So um, that statistic can be kind of surprising for people because everybody knows that smoking is dangerous to health, but it's like, oh wait, like loneliness is dangerous to health. My doctor doesn't talk to me about that. They ask about my smoking and drinking, but they don't talk to me about, how are my friendships? How's my social support necessarily? So, investing in friendships just as important as exercise or eating well or sleeping, all of those other things that we think about more readily when it comes to maintaining health and well-being.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for mentioning that. And I think that's the really important role around mental health professionals, social workers, and how we can hopefully have some clients that search for this service, not only when there's hard things happening, but maybe when change is happening and as we'd want to like succeed more and be just better so that we can address these things before they become this like physical symptoms of things or fall into this really more serious diagnosis that we're needing to treat. So thank you for sharing that. Now, I see that we're also, you've had some experience with how there's this proven protective factor for mental health. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so there was one study that I really like to refer to. It was in the UK of 100,000 medical patients and followed them over a number of years and was really trying to identify like what are the factors that protect against depression. So they looked at 106 different factors that were things that we have the ability to change. So they weren't looking at like biological family history or socioeconomic status. They were looking at things like, meditation, sleep, eating habits, exercise. And of all those things, they found that having people to confide in was the most important protective factor for depression. So I think that's kind of for me that's kind of exciting because that's something that we can change. You know, we do you know, it can be hard to make connections, but it's something that we can do, and it's exciting to think like, oh, you know, if I work on my relationships, that's gonna both protect against depression from developing, but also reduce existing symptoms. So it's both prevention and treatment.
Yeah. So how do we help? I've noticed like a few things come up with some clients mentioning how it's hard to identify a support system and they feel like they don't have anyone. And of course, this could
Yeah.
be around that topic of loneliness, right?
Yes.
How do we help our clients be able to identify or build this strong social bond and relationship?
Yeah, so I think it's a great question. I think it's like one that lots of adults are struggling with because as I mentioned, I think it can be really hard for adults to make friends. And I kind of think of building connection in three different buckets, like three different areas to work on. One is around mindset because sometimes our own, you know, maybe like social anxiety or negative beliefs or fears might get in the way of connecting. So there's mindset stuff. Then there's just the skills of connecting, which most of us weren't taught. I think there's this sort of like idea that we're supposed to just know how to do it. And some of us are taught maybe by our families or so on, but it's not a skill that most people learn in school. And I can't think of a more important skill to learn as like how to connect with people, how to get along, communicate, and so on. So the mindset, skills, and then the third bucket or area is opportunity. Um, that I think also, you know, if you look back historically, again, most of us were living in much more community situations and now are more physically isolated. There's more people who are living alone. There's people relocate much more frequently. Fewer people are getting married and so on. So I think just structurally, there's sometimes a lack of opportunity for people to really engage and get to know each other. Even people who are surrounded by people. So like I work a lot with colleges and businesses. So, you know, those are obviously environments. There's lots of people there. So there's lots of interaction, but again, interaction doesn't necessarily mean connection. And so, in terms of clinicians, I think depending on the person, you could be working in any one of those buckets or all three, like the mindset piece, the skill piece, or the like finding the right opportunities that are actually going to help them make those closer social supports.
Yeah, I love that. Use that very similarly with coping skills. I think it's important to
Yeah,
have coping skills that we use outside, but inside,
yeah.
around people and alone. So I love that concept as well, as you mentioned. And it's important to kind of keep all of those things in mind because those are definitely some really strong connections there. So thank you. And around adult friendships, so is there some myths that people carry around? And maybe there's some pressures or some stressors
Mhm.
around these myths?
Yeah, I think there's a few. One I think I've kind of just touched on them a little bit, but I'll go elaborate a little bit more. I mean, one I think there's this idea like everybody else has found their friends. Everybody else is connected. I'm the only one who's lonely because sometimes it looks that way or can feel that way. So I think it's helpful to recognize like, no, when you look at the data, this is a really pervasive problem that a lot of people are struggling with. So it's not you, it's not like there's something wrong with me because I'm not connecting. It's like, no, there's something going on in the country and in other more westernized countries as well. So that's one myth, and then I think the other one I mentioned is I think there's this idea of it's supposed to just sort of happen naturally. You're supposed to just like meet people and there's this spark and then that's it. Like you're best friends forever.
Like the
And
movie.
it might work that way occasionally, but more often friendship happens when people are much more intentional about it. Like when they, kind of are actively um, working on building a relationship or actively seeking out opportunities that are going to help facilitate connection. I like to I talk a lot about studies. I like to compare two different studies around friendship that kind of contrast the natural approach versus the intentional approach. Um, so there's a researcher, Jeffrey Hall, who wanted to find out how long it takes to make a friend. And so he was looking at adults who just relocated to a new city, and was studying how many hours of time they needed to spend with somebody before they became close friends. So to go from meeting somebody to becoming close friends. And he found that it took 219 hours of time spent together, which is a long time. And it was time mostly outside of work. So it's like free time. So when you think about that, that's like 5 full work weeks. That's like a lot of time. So time is one obstacle to friendship, but another study by Arthur Aaron found that two people can get close in less than an hour. So there's like obviously a really huge difference there. And Jeffrey Hall was looking at people kind of going about their normal lives, like the natural, let it happen naturally approach. Whereas Arthur Aaron was bringing two people together and giving them a set of instructions that were designed to help them get close, and it worked. So it's sort of like if you do the things that are shown to build connection, you can kind of skip over 200 hours and get close much more quickly. So thinking about being more intentional. But I think that can sometimes feel, it can feel awkward without permission. So I think we need to, and clinicians and all of us need to be thinking about like, how do we create more opportunities where people can have deeper conversations and get past the superficial and get into like what actually helps them get to know each other, what helps them be more intentional.
Yeah. And I think that also falls into our last important topic, right? Around the modern life challenges here
Yeah.
of natural opportunities for friendships, right?
Yeah.
So, would you
Yeah.
mind talking a little bit more about how important this is to consider in our work?
Yeah, so I think, you know, for a lot of people, adult life is kind of, they might be living somewhere where they don't know people. They might be in a job where they don't know people. They might be raising family and be really busy doing all of that. And so it can be hard to figure out like where do I meet people? And so really um again like thinking about how to find or create those opportunities. um I like to I like to use the metaphor of a connection desert because I think often people blame themselves for being lonely. They're like, I'm lonely because I'm an introvert or I'm socially awkward or I don't know how to talk to people or I just don't have time or all of those things. But for people who are familiar with the term food desert, it's about like living somewhere where they don't have access to nutritious food. And so then they're like getting their food at the convenience store and just filling up on more kind of junky food that's not going to really be supportive of their health. And so I think kind of the larger culture has moved into a bit of a connection desert where there aren't as many opportunities for these quality interactions. There's lots of social media. We have easy access to these like short, superficial interactions. We might be sort of like passing people at work and be like, "Hey, how's it going? Fine, how are you?" But we need to like kind of carve out pockets where we can actually be like, well, no, like really, how are you? Or like, tell me about what's going on in your life, or um, give people opportunities to learn more and go deeper.
Yeah, definitely. That's really important to consider. And I think especially now with how much time has changed of now everything's fast, like paced of like
Hmm.
maybe losing some patience, but with that it's like go, 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 go. How fast can
Yeah,
we get things? Um,
yeah,
and that can be around like connections as well, but also
yeah,
losing that connection because we want to do things so fast. Do we notice that as
yeah.
well?
Yeah, and I think we're a little bit trained by social media to expect really quick rewards, like to have like a dopamine burst every every 10 seconds when somebody likes our post, or something really entertaining happens. And real life is slower, and it's often more awkward. So that can be an obstacle of people are like, oh, but this is more uncomfortable or awkward, or I'm not sure what to say. And so, yeah, just kind of recognizing that and having the ability to sit with it and to not be constantly rewarded.
Yeah, definitely. And I like how you mention COVID because it has me thinking of how much has changed with so much more curbside and delivery and like
Yeah,
that. That's also
yeah,
lack of that social conversation, even if it's just with someone within your community,
yeah,
someone that you're interacting with. So I appreciate you sharing that. It's definitely something important to consider um, around how we get certain services, especially with
mhm,
clients. I think a big thing I've heard as well, like struggling with having to pick up medication because
yeah,
of this pressure around having to socialize, right?
yeah.
So,
Yeah, and that's reinforcing because it's like we don't have to leave the house. We can order our groceries in. We can, our entertainment can be in our living room rather than leaving the house and going out. And then because we're not doing it all of the time, we're not in the habit of doing it, and it feels less and less comfortable. But then we feel more and more isolated, and so it's like it's like anything. The more you do it, the easier it is and the more comfortable it becomes.
yeah, thank you. Our learning objectives here as well as we continue learning on this and how anyone listening in, we're here to identify these psychological impacts, right, or of loneliness and explain how these connections serve as a protective factor against loneliness. How have you seen that this helps with the people that you serve or just through your experience as well? Could you share a little bit on that?
Sure. So I created my background is as a social worker. I spent 15 years on college campuses. I had to think about that. Um, and was just seeing very high rates of loneliness there, and students really struggling to connect. And so I created this program called Project Connect, which is a 6-session program designed to help people make friends. And so um, I haven't, we've done assessment on how it impacts loneliness. So participation in this group definitely decreases loneliness from start to finish. We haven't done assessment around depression, but people have shared just personally, like qualitatively, that it's helped them make friends, it's helped them like come out of their shell, it's helped them practice being more open and vulnerable in their relationships. And like I think about one woman, like I was doing a virtual group and there was a woman who participated who had really struggled with depression her entire life, and reported that she almost never felt relief from it, like she almost like every day was kind of a struggle. And so uh, she participated in this virtual group, which is, just 6 sessions of meeting with other people and connecting. So it's a group of strangers. And she just said, like, even at the end of an hour session, she would feel her mood really lifting. And she worked remotely, so she was home alone all day. And so I think that social contact really made a difference, and it was something that was surprising to her, because I think a lot of people feel like they're not gonna connect with strangers so quickly, for one, but also that, people expect that they're not really gonna connect over Zoom, that it's different than in person, and so that was really, that was really awesome to see her sort of open up and, like, feel lighter and see her mood lifting even in a short period of time like that.
Yeah, definitely with some of those breakthroughs there, right? Are there special tools and skills that you all focus on this Project Connect that you notice really helps make that breakthrough?
Yeah, so the program is really focused on just helping people build relationships, helping people get close. So it's not technically like a treatment program or a mental health program even, it's just about, like, building friendships. Um, and it's based on research, including the research of Arthur Aaron, who I mentioned earlier, like, who was able to build connection in an hour. So he identified the secret ingredient of what helped people connect as gradually escalating reciprocal self-disclosure, which is kind of a mouthful, um, but really it's about sharing. It's about mutual sharing and asking people to share more deeply. So, like, helping them, kind of providing some scaffolding so that you're not, like, gonna be sharing your life story in the first minute, but helping people gradually go deeper and share a little bit more. Um, so that's a big component. So sharing and creating, uh, I talk about sharing, caring, and repairing as, like, the things you really need to create strong connection. So sharing, letting people get to know you, opening up, um, that reciprocal piece, but also when other people are sharing, like, making sure your response is caring, like being compassionate, really listening, giving them your attention, um, and then if there's any conflict or hurts, things like that, then instead of what often happens now of, like, ghosting or canceling, actually, like, working through that rift in the relationship. So I think providing us, like, creating a safe atmosphere, but then also providing the structure of guided question prompts and guided activities that are designed to help them get close.
Yeah. And with this, as they go through the this with you and the group work, how is it that you all get to measure or assess the changes that are made of their well-being?
Mhm. So mostly do facilitator training, and then there's facilitators in now over 100 schools, colleges, and organizations that are, um, leading groups to build connection within their communities and institutions. Um, So I provide some evaluation materials. The basic is just like a program evaluation, asking them about their experience. But I also really encourage people to use different assessment tools. And I think the one that's been most commonly used is the UCLA loneliness scale. So doing that at pre-assessment and post-assessment shows a reduction in loneliness. And then we also have some other pre and post assessment questions that kind of ask about like how many friends they had before, how many friends they have after, um, how how satisfied they feel at their college or at their workplace, things like that that help assess their experience, how how um how supported they feel by their college or their workplace. So we tend to see all of those things increase over the course of the 6 sessions.
Awesome. Very neat. Is there anything that you all consider to extend some of those services, seeing that the client might need continuing services on this, and how do you get to see that?
Yeah, so there's a couple different ways. I mean, I think some is if the facilitator of the group feels like somebody is really struggling beyond the needs of that group, they can refer them to refer them to more clinical or support services. But also sometimes the groups decide to continue. Sometimes the groups are like, we don't want to end at 6 sessions, and they might plan to meet in an ongoing way. I was just talking with a business that I worked with yesterday, and they said a couple of their Project Connect groups have formed other groups. So one became like a running club, and they had, and then they expanded to welcome other people into the running club, and they just had like 12 people run a marathon or a half marathon. I was like, wow, okay, that's really cool. Not something I'm not a runner, so I'm like really glad that that worked for this group, and that they found a way to continue to meet, and they continue to use some of the elements in Project Connect so that they're not just running, but they're also connecting as a group, and carving out some time for that. And then there was another group that had formed like a games group, so they continue to meet and play games together. So there's ways for the groups to extend, and add additional sessions, or sometimes it evolves into another group, or depending on the setting, sometimes somebody might graduate from a group and then start a new group with a new set of people. So they, met 5 people in the first group, really enjoyed it, then start another group and meet another five people.
That's really awesome that they get to do that, and be really creative in those ways of running and what you mentioned there. So that's really neat. I think that's definitely a really important factor, right, in creating
Yeah.
those strong bonds and relationships.
Yes.
So that also goes hand in hand with that um, evidence-based strategies around clinical and
Mhm.
organizational as well as community setting. So that's really neat to see that working out from the group setting out into the community.
Yeah, and the hope is that the group is sort of a jumping off point or a foundation, and so it creates it builds the relationships enough that participants are then comfortable being like, like, let's get together, like let's continue to be friends, let's do coffee, or let's go to this event together, or whatever it is, which can be really hard to do if you just meet somebody once and you're like, you seem cool, but it would be kind of weird for me to ask, like, hey, do you want to be friends? Like, when we just met. But and anecdotally, there's a lot of people who do the 6 sessions and then continue to have those ongoing one-on-one friendships afterwards with people from the groups.
Awesome. So yeah, beyond just group and beyond just hanging out and making now they have these skills to apply with one another. So that's very neat.
Yeah.
So, and is there any ways that other individuals, like as a clinician, and mental health professionals, how is it that people can build these practices into daily life?
Yeah, so I think, thinking about thinking about ways to kinda break through the superficial social norm. So it might be, it might be instituting, like, a check-in at the family dinner table with a prompt of, like, uh, you know, what's something that went well today and what's something that didn't go well, or share your happies and crappies, um, or like if you've got kids at bedtime being like, what was your low, what was your high, what was your like firefly, which is like a fun, cool, unusual thing or a surprise or whatever they want it to be. So like little mini practices like that, and those could be built into meetings as well. Like those could be built into work meetings of have a 5-minute check-in or a five minute, respond to this question prompt at the beginning of a meeting to get to know each other as human beings before moving on to the business. And I think the concern is always like, we don't have time for that because we have so much business. But business goes a lot more smoothly when we have strong relationships. So thinking about, are there ways to kind of practice, start little habits of doing that, or maybe it's like a text where you do it with a friend once a week, where have a question prompt that you respond to over text, or you have a 20-minute phone call where you have a topic or something like that. And that can feel like, again, I think that can feel less natural because it's more intentional, but it can also help people get closer and get deeper. So things like that. Um, there was something else I was going to say, but it's it slipped my mind at the moment. So I think also just asking people deeper questions, like asking questions where you're inviting them to share more of their experience or more about how they feel about something. So even a question that's as simple as like, where are you from? So instead of, or where did you grow up? Instead of asking, where did you grow up? Like asking like, what did you like about where you grew up? Or what were the things that you liked and didn't like about where you grew up? Or just something like that is going to give a much more rich response than just the word you grew up. That's like a one sentence. So kind of thinking about how can I ask questions that are going to invite more? Or when somebody asks me a question, like sharing just a little bit more that gives them something to follow up on. I heard somebody, I can't remember who it was, but I heard somebody refer to that as conversational crumbs. So you're leaving, you're leaving a crumb for them to follow up on. So if somebody asks like, where'd you grow up? You, instead of just saying where you grew up, you could say, oh, I grew up here. And, there are things I really liked about it, but I'm not a city person. I learned that I really like, living closer to nature or something like that. Then they can follow up on that.
That's really awesome. Yeah, and that's important around do we see some of those differences too in like the professional setting as you were mentioning and how we get to keep that like work-life balance in our conversations as well.
Mhm. Yeah, I think for a long time there was this idea of work of like you cross the threshold and you leave your personal life behind and you become this professional. And the research is really that people are going to be so much more engaged at work if they have friends at work, if they're connected at work and if they feel like they're able to be themselves. Like if somebody cares about them as a human being, not just as what they're doing.
Yeah, definitely. And how have you noticed like relationships to connection evolved through your work that you've seen now with all of knowing all of this research and putting this into practice? How have you seen that evolve through your work?
I'm not sure if I understand the question. Could you
As far as like loneliness and relationships making some changes, have you noticed that you have made changes
Oh,
within?
me personally? Okay. Yeah, so thinking about it's really funny because I as I mentioned I was working in a college setting and I developed the Project Connect program there and it really took off. Like it had this amazing response. And I presented it at a few conferences and people were really excited about it and I was like ready to leave. I'd wanted to be self-employed for a long time. And so I took the leap and left, and it was right at the beginning of COVID. Um, and so for the last 5 years, I've been focused full time on building connection, but I've also been working remotely from home. And so it's really interesting contrast of like focusing on how important this is, and then I'm like, wow, I have to structure my day in a like be intentional about structuring my day to make sure that I'm getting connection because suddenly I'm not interacting with other people physically in the office. Um, so I think for me, the evolution I mean, there's definitely been an evolution of just really recognizing the importance of connection. Like, I used to be one of those people who was uh like, I have to be productive all the time. I have to be doing things, checking things off my to-do list. If I'm at work, I need to be working and not chatting or whatever. And so that's really been a mental shift of like of recognizing that chatting is productive, that developing relationships, spending time with people is really important. It's not the way we normally think of productivity, but it is really valuable in the same way that I might say like I need to exercise. Now I'm like I need to make sure that I get that social time in and get those interactive needs met.
Definitely. Well, I appreciate you sharing this because it definitely, like, I see where you got to fill in this gap and, of course, help so many individuals all the way around. Because you mentioned how there's facilitators everywhere providing this service. And now people are going beyond group and doing running and other clubs.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
so much more. So I appreciate you being able to identify this, fill that gap and also just see the changes too with time and how you shared your own experience. So with clinicians, again, some people are taking on more remote jobs. Um,
Yep.
so keeping this information um, to learn from for our clients, but also to apply for ourselves, um,
Yeah.
making sure that we're not burning out and that we're,
Yeah.
um, doing things for ourselves so that we're not feeling lonely and we're able to bring ourselves completely to this space when we serve others.
Yeah, I think clinicians it can be a lonely job if you're in private practice and especially if you're in private practice and like working remotely and you're giving so much emotionally and then there's the confidentiality piece of not really being able to share that with people. um, So I actually worked with a group of clinicians last year, and they were really talking about like just feeling so emotionally drained by the end of the day that it's hard to then go out and muster up the energy to be social. And so I think you're right that like finding that support, finding a way to also receive some support and care and not just be giving all the time is really, really important. Maybe finding, like um, group consultation or things like that, but it doesn't even have to be nearly as informal as group consultation. But I think it could be nice to have a group of clinicians who are supporting each other or just doing social stuff, just kind of like bringing the energy down, doing something fun, people who kind of get it, and you can share some of that if you need to, or you can just have more fun social time together.
Yeah, definitely. And I think I've seen a little bit of that too, somewhat in my area of like coffee with clinicians, and it's
Mm,
just social workers or mental health professionals meeting together, and we're just having coffee time because people who are in private practice, it can be really hard or working remote now. Um,
yeah.
and of course, always staying connected with any type of social networks. And sometimes we're
Mhm.
having to step out of the box and
Yeah.
maybe set that up ourselves, or getting back connected with maybe who you went to school with or who you worked with
Yeah.
previously. So I appreciate all of these um, tips and, of course, all of the information around the research. And I really hope that it'll be helpful to the ones listening to be able to apply it to, again, practice as well as to yourself to better serve. Is there anything?
That's awesome that there's a coffee for clinicians going on. I think that's a really good idea.
Yeah, looking forward to. There's some like I think there are Fridays over the summer, so just kicking off, but looking forward to seeing what that looks like.
Yeah, nice. Nice.
Is there anything else that you would like to add?
Um, I mean, I guess the other piece of it is more advocacy, social change. Like, I in my ideal world, I would love to see insurance reimbursing for social groups and social activities because it has such a huge impact on mental health and well-being. So, encouraging clinicians to run groups, not just one-on-one. I know it can sometimes be hard to get people to sign up for groups, but it can be so powerful. And then, get your insurance companies to reimburse for those groups. So even if it's a friendship building, kind of group, call it a social skills group, but get insurance to cover it because it's so important to create those spaces to make connection and to have peer support and to normalize people's experiences can be really powerful.
Yeah, and I've heard some of this as concerns from clients as well. So, what would be your advice as clinicians, what can we do specifically, or some more ideas around how can we advocate if we hear this coming from our clients, and of course, hearing this coming from you, how can we advocate around insurance for group?
Like some of the research around loneliness has been coming from insurance companies. So Cigna has been a big researcher focusing on loneliness. So they're aware of the physical and the mental health impact. So there is awareness. Um, but I think it would be really cool to see that awareness translate into funding and reimbursement for social practices.
Yeah, and maybe even connecting with that macro side of
Mhm.
social work.
Yeah.
Uh, I know NESW does a lot of things around advocacy and
Mhm.
speaking with legislators. So, as clinicians, maybe stepping in with having that conversation and seeing what that next step is there. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, I appreciate you sharing all of this great information because it's as time is changing, we're noticing more of this loneliness showing up. So I'm glad that we're able to learn about this to better serve our clients. So thank you so much for your time today and again teaching us on this topic.
Thank you. It was great, great having the opportunity to talk about it. And if anybody's interested in learning more about my work, they can Google, Jessica Gifford and Project Connect. My website is projectconnect-us.com. So it's got more information on what I'm doing, and um, love to just always have more people out there thinking about connection and helping people create connection.
Thank you, Jessica. Appreciate it. I hope that we can all check that out so we can better serve our clients and learn so much more from Jessica on that.
I hope you enjoyed this continuing education course from Agents of Change. Want to earn your CE credits for this course? Visit agentsofchangetraining.com or the link in the description to purchase the course and take the post test. If you're looking for more CEs, check out our unlimited plan. You will get unlimited access to 150 plus ASWB and NBCC approved continuing education courses for one low annual fee. We're always adding new courses. Did I mention we also have 5 free CE credits available too? Check it out at agentsofchangetraining.com.